The Bureau had every single piece of the puzzle: video, blood, DNA, plus 50,000 leads pouring in from the public. They had a composite sketch, a digital Bitcoin wallet, one glove found in a remote field, and they had a pacemaker. That device quit sending data at precisely 2:28 a.m. Yet, 95 days later, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Enter Nancy Grace. She is a titan of true crime, a seasoned former prosecutor who has looked dangerous killers in the eye. She has handled more missing persons files than most small-town police departments will manage in an entire professional career. Now, Nancy Grace is voicing the hard truth. Millions are whispering. The FBI looked in the wrong place entirely. The answer, the actual truth, might have been sitting 2 miles down the road this whole time. Consider that. This investigation does not follow a predictable path. By the end of this video, you will finally see this case clearly. You will grasp the mechanics of this mystery in a way the average cable news viewer never could. When you cut through media noise and scrutinize the forensic timeline and physical evidence, a much grimmer reality comes into focus. We will dissect every confirmed data point. No rumors, no internet theories, just the hard facts. No more, no less. Let us rewind to the start. To grasp what Nancy Grace is pointing out today, you must reconstruct that night. It was January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and living her life in peace. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the famous anchor of NBC's Today Show, a face millions of Americans know. But status means nothing here. One physical reality defines this case. Nancy Guthrie could not physically walk more than 50 yards. She used a walker. Her heart was failing. She relied on a pacemaker just to survive. She was not a person capable of vanishing. She did not simply wander off into the vast Arizona desert landscape. At 2 in the morning, she did not just get lost. Sheriff Chris Nanos stated it very clearly himself. Quote, "She could not walk 50 yards alone." End quote. That evening, Nancy shared a final meal with her daughter. She was with Annie Guthrie and her husband, Tommaso Cion. A standard family dinner. No red flags, no tension. After the meal, Tommaso drove Nancy back home. He dropped her at her residence in Tucson, Arizona, and left. He watched her enter the front door. He pulled away. That was the final confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie alive. What occurred next in those dark hours between that drop-off and the discovery of an empty house is the focal point. This is the heart of the forensics. Here is what the lens saw, 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, 2026. A masked figure wearing gloves walked up to Nancy Guthrie's porch and cut the feed. He knew exactly where the camera sat. He knew how to kill the power, no hesitation. He did not scan the street. He did not look nervous. He moved with a cold, surgical precision that both local police and Nancy Grace have highlighted as a major tell. This is proof of a high-level reconnaissance mission. At 2:12 in the morning, the motion sensors tripped again. At 2:28, the pacemaker monitor failed its daily check-in. For a woman of 84, that is not a technical glitch. For someone reliant on that hardware, it is everything. That is the exact millisecond her timeline comes to a stop. FBI experts eventually pulled the video from Google Nest servers. Data, the intruder, thought he had scrubbed from the device. The suspect wore dark gear, carried an Ozark trail pack, and had gloves on. Every detail was preserved in the cloud. His height, his frame, his specific gait, all caught on tape. But here is the detail Nancy Grace finds haunting. This predator had been there before, multiple times. On January 11th, he was caught on camera scouting the entire property. He likely returned in late January. Then, on January 30th, the night before she vanished, the shadow came back again. But the gear changed. Now he had the backpack. Now he had a weapon. Nancy Grace put it bluntly. He arrived mission-ready on the 30th. The days prior, he was just mapping out the scene. This was not random. This was weeks of scouting, weeks of hunting, weeks of waiting for the perfect window. And that is where the FBI stumbled. They drew a circle that was simply too tight for the reality. When agents draw a search perimeter, they are making a bet on the suspect's mobility. They claim the answer is inside that line. They dump every resource there. They filter every tip through it. They spend all their technical power inside that box. In this case, the FBI stayed too local. They obsessed over a 2-mile radius around the home. Nancy Grace went on TMZ and called it out. She argued the boundary was far too small for a suspect this cold and this well-prepared for a hit. They funneled their initial search into a tiny 2-mile zone. Nancy Grace was public with her doubts on TMZ. Let's be blunt. The fatal error was a crime scene perimeter drawn too tight and locked down too fast. This rigid tape excluded critical evidence. Consider this. Look at what sat completely ignored just beyond that narrow boundary. Exactly 2 miles from the Guthrie driveway, a lone glove lay discarded in the dirt alongside a secondary road. Lab techs confirmed the link. Visually, the fabric and grip texture mirrored the gloves worn by the primary suspect. Video matched the find. Forensic swabbing extracted a male DNA profile, but CODIS returned 0 matches for the subject. 2 miles out, that evidence sat right on the line. Grace argues that drawing the net too small was catastrophic. If a killer drops clues 2 miles from the door, think about the 3 or 4 mile radius. What else? Which extraction routes through those outer neighborhoods were ignored? Detectives never fully analyzed the transit paths beyond the primary zone. At 2.2 miles, a residential security camera pinged. It recorded a dark silhouette of a vehicle moving fast. The timestamp said February 1st, early morning. Reports indicate that investigators dismissed this lead because it missed their search radius. Just outside the circle, 2.2 miles. This brings us to the map Annie Guthrie manually constructed herself. The case turns intimate and messy. During the initial days, Annie performed a task most grieving families miss. Nancy's daughter, Annie, took action. She did what law enforcement had neglected and began tracing the most likely escape paths. She sketched the getaway route herself. Then, she blasted that map into every local group chat, begging for camera footage. She hunted for private security data along those roads. Eventually, former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer reviewed the civilian-generated map. The retired Fed had been tracking every forensic detail. She analyzed Annie's work and made a statement that stunned everyone. People froze when they heard her verdict. She didn't just agree, she said she was all over that specific map. She validated the daughter's logic. That route was tactically sound and required immediate surveillance review. Grace went live with it. She broadcast the daughter's sketch to the nation, highlighting every potential digital witness along that road. She flagged a nail salon where cameras pointed right at the asphalt. Then, she circled the nearby elementary school's perimeter. That school had overlapping high-definition angles. Next, she identified a recently renovated salon with brand-new, active security hardware. Then she asked the burning question police have avoided. If this was the killer's exit, and cameras were everywhere, why do we have 0 usable footage after 95 days? Not one clear plate or make and model has surfaced. Logic suggests 2 scenarios. Option 1. Police have the video, but are withholding it for a future grand jury. It is a strategic hold. Or, option 2. The subject performed pre-operational surveillance and expertly bypassed every known lens. Grace suspects the latter. She noted that when the subject was spotted on the porch, he was absolutely brazen. He didn't hide his features. He didn't check his 6 or scan for witnesses. He stood there with total confidence. 0 urgency. He ignored the doorbell camera because his plan included tearing it right off the wall after the breach. His focus was the ingress and egress. Forensic analysts agree that every turn in that escape was calculated and vetted. The path was dry run and rehearsed long before the morning of January 31st. This was not a random crime. Now we hit the flashpoint. This is the evidence that split the public right down the middle. Hours after the missing persons report went live, digital sleuths focused their crosshairs on Tommaso Cioni. He was the last point of contact. He drove her home, watched her enter, and then left her alone. An Italian national living here for 20 years. He married Annie in 2006 and works as a teacher. Records describe a quiet professional. Suddenly, this private man was thrust into a massive federal investigation simply through marriage. He became the face of a national mystery. Online, the character assassination was swift, brutal, and completely evidence-free. Look at the record. On February 16, 2026, the sheriff spoke. Chris Nanos explicitly stated that the Guthrie family, including every sibling and spouse, was officially cleared of all suspicion. That clearance included Tommaso and Annie. They were no longer in the investigators' sights as persons of interest. Every relative was exonerated. FBI veteran Jennifer Coffindaffer took her defense even further. She didn't mince words. She called the claims against Tommaso Cioni, quote, totally absurd. She detailed the elimination process. They used cellular tower pings, GPS vehicle telemetry, and rigorous alibi cross-checks. They scrutinized every financial transaction and digital footprint. The FBI's standard for clearing family is incredibly high. That verification finished early. Yet doubts persist because Nancy Grace continues to highlight a specific piece of information. Grace doesn't suspect the family, but she keeps hammering on a detail only an insider could possibly know. Annie Guthrie possessed intimate knowledge of her mother's daily habits. Consider this, she knew exactly which specific evenings Nancy stepped out and which nights she stayed home. She knew the precise hour Nancy turned off the lights to sleep. Beyond that, Annie understood the physical structure of that residence, every hallway and every potential hiding spot. She was aware of the specific entrance Nancy preferred for daily use. Think about the implications. If an individual with that level of internal intelligence was involved, leaked Nancy's itinerary to an outside party, even by accident, the entire scope of the investigation shifts. We are talking about a leak that enabled a sophisticated criminal operation. That detail fundamentally alters our understanding of the offender's pre-operational planning phase. To be clear, Nancy Grace has stopped short of leveling any direct accusations against Annie herself. The same applies to Tommaso, no formal allegations there. However, Grace repeatedly emphasizes a sharp point. The individuals within Nancy's inner circle held the keys to her security. These are the exact people positioned to provide an abductor with critical intelligence. We are looking at specific details like lock types and alarm codes that a stranger just wouldn't know. Whether that data transfer was purposeful or accidental is a vital nuance the public often ignores. Yet, that specific distinction serves as the cornerstone of the entire forensic theory. It is the single most important factor. Now, consider the biological evidence. In April 2026, investigators finally released a major update regarding the physical evidence in this case. Significant progress emerged from the detective work. Analysts focused on a solitary hair follicle recovered from deep within Nancy Guthrie's residence, a piece of evidence that could hold the killer's code. The Pima County Sheriff's Department initially opted to bypass federal channels. They shipped that critical biological sample to a commercial, private laboratory located out in Florida for processing. Time ticked away, weeks turning into months of silence. Finally, 77 days after the initial collection, the evidence was handed over to the FBI's premier laboratory located in Quantico, Virginia. Nancy Grace didn't mince words regarding the consequences of that procedural lag. Think about it. Every 7 days that a genetic profile languishes in a commercial facility is lost time. While that sample sat in a private lab rather than the FBI's headquarters, the absolute highest level of forensic sequencing on the planet was standing completely idle. The clock was running. The case went cold while technology gathered dust. You see, the Quantico facility operates with federal funding and classified equipment that no commercial laboratory could ever hope to afford or maintain. Forensic reports categorize the evidence as a complex DNA mixture. In plain English, this means the sample was contaminated with biological markers from at least 2 different human beings. Pulling a clean individual profile out of a tangled genetic mess is a grueling scientific process. It demands hundreds of hours of computing power, even when the biological material is pristine. Federal agents have officially ruled out a match with Nancy Guthrie's own genetic code. Beyond that, the testing confirmed that the unknown contributor was not one of her immediate household members. The results excluded every close contact and family member who had already been vetted by investigators. That leaves us with one burning clinical question. To whom does this genetic signature belong? Law enforcement is keeping that specific identity under wraps for now. But make no mistake, the moment that name is pulled from the database, this entire investigation is going to explode. It will be the definitive breakthrough. Now, look at the digital evidence, the Bitcoin trail. There is another critical element of this narrative that warrants a much deeper look. Nancy Grace has identified this as the FBI's most viable path to a conviction. It all centers on the digital ransom notes that were sent to the family early on. During the first week of February 2026, the kidnappers sent demands for a massive Bitcoin payout. They included a specific alphanumeric wallet address where the funds were to be sent. The requested amount was staggering, valued at nearly $6 million at the time. The FBI, however, stood their ground. They flatly refused to negotiate or authorize any kind of payment. They wouldn't send a single cent. Nancy Grace broke down the logic behind this refusal, using a sharp perspective that most casual observers have completely overlooked until this very moment. There is a common misconception that cryptocurrency is invisible. That is a dangerous myth criminals rely on, but it is a vulnerability that federal cybercrime units exploit with surgical precision. Consider the mechanics. Every single transfer is etched into a permanent public ledger known as the blockchain. The specific wallet address used by the kidnapper is out there for the world to see. The flow of digital currency, both inbound and outbound, is documented down to the last decimal point. Every single microtransaction is archived in a way that can never be deleted or hidden. The ledger is immutable. On February 10, 2026, a low-value Bitcoin deposit suddenly landed in that monitored ransom wallet. It was a calculated move that triggered immediate federal alerts. Attached to that specific transaction was a clear message, quote, "We are ready to talk," end quote. But here is the kicker: that communication did not originate from the FBI negotiators. Law enforcement never sanctioned that transfer. It means someone else, either the primary suspect or a shadowy associate, decided to initiate contact. They stepped out into the light, even just for a millisecond. The very second they hit send, they generated a digital breadcrumb that can't be erased. Nancy Grace summarized the situation with her trademark clinical bluntness during her latest broadcast. While the public thinks crypto is a black hole, we are learning that the FBI views this digital trail as their most robust piece of evidence. It is a technological trap. Specialized blockchain analysts, the same elite teams who dismantled global ransomware rings and dark web marketplaces, are now turning their full attention to this case. They are hunting for an unseen suspect. These experts are mapping the network in reverse. They are scrutinizing every single source wallet that contributed funds and every destination wallet that pulled money out of that specific criminal account. They are pulling IP logs from the moment the wallet was created and tracking every crypto exchange that processed those coins. In the world of high-stakes cyber forensics, that trail is permanent. It is forever. Latest reports suggest the FBI is confident that these digital breadcrumbs are leading them directly to a physical location and a real-world suspect. The net is closing. To understand the core of Nancy Grace's argument, we need to return to the central theme of this discussion. Consider the evidence. I want to be extremely precise about the message she is sending. Grace is stopping short of accusing the family members of a direct crime. She has not labeled Tommaso Cione as a formal suspect in this kidnapping or any related illegal activity. She isn't claiming that Nancy Guthrie is intentionally withholding evidence from the police. Instead, her point is much more razor-sharp and focused on the failures of the initial investigation. The Bureau committed a classic tactical error by narrowing their search parameters way too early. By fixating on a strict 2-mile radius, they potentially ignored vital evidence sitting just outside that circle. The intimate details of Nancy's routine, whether they were shared on purpose or through a simple slip of the tongue, remain an unexplored lead. The forensic psychology of the house has been ignored. That 77-day delay in DNA processing at the Quantico lab cost the investigation irreplaceable time. We are dealing with an offender who possessed the extreme discipline to watch a target house. He scouted the property at least 3 times before initiating the crime. This individual was meticulous enough to map out every security camera and bypass them during his high-speed getaway. That level of professional operational security doesn't just happen by accident. Logic suggests someone provided the blueprint for that house. And here is the scary part. Maybe they didn't even know they were doing it. Digital breadcrumbs, perhaps a public post about her evening meal, or just a careless comment dropped at the local grocery store. Someone told the wrong predator that an 84-year-old woman lived solo, relying entirely on a walker to move around her house. This was surgical. The calculated timing and preparation suggests the abductor knew the exact millisecond to strike without being seen. That intel originated somewhere specific. Nancy Grace is certain the FBI is still pulling on that specific lead right now. 0 arrests after 3 months. Today is May 5th, 2026, marking 95 days since Nancy Guthrie was last seen. Gone. At 84, her health is failing, her heart is weak, and missing her daily prescriptions is a death sentence. Each sunset brings a heavy, crushing reality that most people simply lack the stomach to face head-on. Consider that. Bureau agents are processing 50,000 tips. They have genetic profiles and hours of grainy digital surveillance footage to analyze. Forensics found a glove carrying foreign male DNA. Investigators are also tracking a specific Bitcoin wallet tied to the kidnapping. Evidence includes a hand-drawn map from Nancy Guthrie. Plus, a person of interest was caught on camera stalking her front porch. He was there 3 times. Now, Nancy Grace is on air, gesturing at a 2-mile radius and demanding a wider search. She says that search zone is far too small. 95 long days. Authorities are offering $100,000 for any information that pinpoints where Nancy Guthrie is being held right now. If you have a lead, contact tips.fb.i.gov immediately. Your information might be the final piece needed. Bring her home. This investigation is active and hot. The Bureau has confirmed they are not backing off yet. Quantico is currently running new DNA samples. Specialized blockchain experts are de-anonymizing that crypto wallet as we speak. Fresh investigators are scrutinizing every file. But 95 days is an eternity for an 84-year-old woman without her vitals. She is isolated from her family, her medicine, and her home. Nancy Grace is refusing to let this story fade away. She is relentless. Brian Enton remains on the ground in Tucson, and Brian Records will stay on this until the end. Count on us for every single update. Whenever the needle moves in this case, we will be the ones to report. You will get the facts here first. Verified data, razor-sharp context, and the deep dive analysis you have come to expect today. Please subscribe to Brian Records. Turn your notifications on now. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. We will not stop talking about this case until we find her.